The chamber was silent except for the soft, crystalline chime of memories being torn apart. Suspended in the Korth Dominion's arena light, the girl hung weightless, her mind flickering like a dying star as fragments of her life were harvested for the crowd's amusement. Each stolen moment dissolved into shimmering data, drifting upward toward the observation tiers where alien nobles murmured in pleasure. But one figure watched from the shadows, unmoving. A Terran scientist, Dr. Erynn Vale, stood behind the containment glass, jaw clenched, pulse steady, calculating. This wasn't entertainment. This was an act of war waiting to be answered. Long before Dr. Erynn Vale stepped into the Dominion arena, the galaxy had already begun drifting toward fracture. The Korth Dominion, an empire built on hierarchical neurobiology, held power not through territory, but through control of memory itself. Their ruling caste treated cognition as currency, perfecting technologies that could extract, trade, and consume recollections the way ancient civilizations once prized gold. What began as a clinical procedure for rehabilitation evolved into spectacle. Memory arenas, where the experiences of captives were stripped for sport. Across their borders, the Terran Federation was taking a very different path. Humanity's rise had been defined not by conquest, but by relentless adaptation. Engineering, diplomacy, and an uncompromising respect for sentient autonomy. While other powers experimented with cognitive alteration, Terrans implemented strict bans, shaping a doctrinal line few dared to cross. No mind shall be violated, even in war. Their ban on neural weapon research became the backbone of Interstellar Treaty A-19, the AI and Cognitive Manipulation Accord. Yet treaties rarely withstand hunger. The galaxy's resource lanes had thinned. Hyperlane trade was strained by pirate consortia operating from the uncharted Erynn Vale. Embargoes on high-density qubit matter, used in advanced AI cores, triggered a series of economic collisions. Empires began nationalizing starship foundries. Border states armed their orbital platforms, and the Dominion, unwilling to reduce its neural entertainment economy, quietly expanded its raids on frontier worlds where Terran oversight was weakest. Korth intelligence believed humans were too restrained to respond, too ethical, too bound by treaties they themselves had authored. They misjudged the Federation's patience. When Dominion raiders abducted a multi-species group from the neutral Brinax corridor, Terran diplomats issued warnings. When the broadcasts from the memory arenas leaked, the Senate demanded investigation. But the Dominion dismissed the concerns as moral theatrics, confident that no human would dare interfere with what they considered internal cultural practice. It was a mistake that would ignite a chain reaction, one that would reshape the Dominion's very sense of self. The discovery of the memory-stripped girl was only the beginning of what the galaxy would soon witness. The broader galactic landscape was a lattice of unstable alliances, each thread stretched thin by competing doctrines of power. The Zurath Combine pushed for militarized AI autonomy, while the Velari Conquered argued for strict biological sovereignty. The Terran Federation, positioned between these extremes, maintained a careful balance. Advanced neurotechnology paired with rigid ethical oversight. It was this balance that allowed them to mediate disputes no other power could survive. But harmony had limits. Smuggling rings operating beyond the Kira's rift began funneling prohibited neural harvesting modules into Dominion territory. These devices, nicknamed lattice hooks, could pull memories with unprecedented speed and clarity. The Dominion integrated them into their arenas within a single cycle, amplifying both profit and cruelty. Intelligence analysts across the galaxy noticed, but only Terran observers fully grasped the danger. The Dominion wasn't just perfecting extraction. They were building a distributed cognitive network fueled by stolen minds. The warning came too late. A Terran reconnaissance team stationed on Brinax Station intercepted a coded transmission. Fragments of a young survivor's mind, broadcast unintentionally during a Dominion processing error. The neural pattern was distorted but unmistakably sentient, an echo of a life unraveling. The data was immediately routed to the Federation's bioneural division, where Dr. Erynn Vale detected something the others missed. A signature of deliberate fragmentation, not incidental trauma. Someone had tried to resist the extraction. Someone had fought back. This discovery struck a deeper chord within the Federation. To them, memory was identity, non-negotiable, inviolable, the foundation of personhood. The idea of harvesting it as spectacle echoed the darkest epochs of ancient Earth. Era's humanity swore never to repeat. The Senate convened an emergency session, and for the first time in 3 decades, invoked Directive Helios, authorization to intervene in foreign territory when cognitive violations reached genocidal thresholds. Dr. Vale was appointed lead scientist for the investigation. But investigation quickly evolved into something far larger once the captive herself was located, and once the scale of the Dominion's neural network became clear. What began as a rescue mission would soon become a confrontation with an empire's very architecture of thought. For Terrans, the revelation of the memory arenas was more than an atrocity. It was an assault on the essence of sentience. Humans carried a long memory of their own historical missteps, eras when minds were broken for power or ideology. That legacy made them fiercely protective of cognitive autonomy, and the girl found on Brinax became a symbol of everything they had sworn to oppose. Yet the Federation did not move from vengeance. It moved from responsibility. Terrans believed that if they allowed this violation to continue, they would become complicit. Their outrage did not manifest as chaos. It crystallized into policy, doctrine, and action. From a strategic standpoint, the Dominion's neural infrastructure represented a threat unlike any conventional weapon. Their interlinked arenas formed a cognitive mesh. Millions of harvested memories weaving into prediction algorithms capable of modeling adversaries with terrifying precision. Terran military analysts understood that allowing such a network to mature would shift the galactic balance irreversibly. But striking it physically risked triggering catastrophic neural feedback in the captives. The solution would need to be surgical, something that could neutralize the lattice without destroying the minds trapped within it. This constraint pushed Terran strategy into unfamiliar territory, where neuroscientists and tacticians collaborated as equals. The Dominion's lattice hooks were crude but effective, stripping memories by brute force resonance. Terran technology, by contrast, relied on precision, neural harmonics, adaptive cushioning, reversible mapping. Where the Dominion saw cognition as resource, Terrans saw it as architecture. Dr. Vale's initial analysis led to a startling conclusion. The Dominion had built their entire network atop a flawed algorithm, a recursive structure vulnerable to empathetic overload. The very thing they dismissed in humans, emotional depth, created a potential vector for intervention. Terran engineers began modeling ways to exploit that vulnerability, transforming compassion into a strategic asset. Within the Dominion high caste, humans were viewed as inconvenient idealists, dangerous not because of strength, but because of their refusal to accept cognitive determinism. To the Korth, identity was malleable, disposable, and hierarchy justified any method. But the appearance of Dr. Vale unsettled them. Terrans were known for unpredictability. Their innovations often emerged from emotional impulse rather than rigid logic. Dominion leaders feared that humans might attempt something irrational, something they could not model within their predictive engines. That fear, whispered through their council chamber, marked the first fracture in their confidence. Together, these angles formed the foundation for an intervention no power had ever attempted. The Terran Strategic Council met in a sealed chamber beneath Solnet command, aware that any misstep could plunge half the galaxy into open war. Cognitive intervention was a line no major power had ever crossed, not even during the siege of Orion Gate or the AI mutiny of Cycle 311. Yet the Dominion's neural harvesting lattice posed an existential threat, one that violated every interstellar accord on personhood. After reviewing Dr. Vale's preliminary models, the Council authorized Operation Synapse Mirror, a mission designed not to destroy the Dominion but to confront its foundation. The decision was controversial but unanimous. Terran leadership understood what was at stake. If a civilization normalized the consumption of memory, then no sentient species was safe. Terran ethicists were thrust into the center of military planning, a rarity in interstellar history. Their debate was fierce. Could humanity alter an empire's cognitive structure without becoming oppressors themselves? Some argued intervention risked setting a precedent for ideological conquest. Others insisted that standing idle would sanction genocide by erasure. Dr. Vale provided the turning point. She proposed a method that did not implant Terran ideology but restored a suppressed cognitive function, the capacity for empathetic resonance. Dominion neuroengineers had intentionally muted this trait generations ago to maintain caste obedience. Re-enabling a natural cognitive trait, she argued, was not domination. It was liberation. The ethicists agreed, transforming moral restraint into operational doctrine. Dr. Vale's breakthrough centered on a property buried deep within Korth neurobiology, the atri fold, a dormant neural junction capable of synchronizing emotional and sensory memory. Dormant in their physiology, not absent. By projecting a controlled harmonic pattern through the Dominion's lattice, she theorized it was possible to activate the fold across multiple individuals simultaneously. This would not overwrite memories. It would restore connectivity the Dominion had severed centuries earlier. The challenge was precision. A misalignment could trigger neural collapse across millions. Her team constructed adaptive resonance cores and simulation chambers, testing thousands of permutations until a viable activation profile emerged. It was the first time science had prepared a tool to heal and dismantle an empire in the same breath. Human culture had always treated memory as identity, tradition, and legacy. Their oldest stories, music, and languages carried the imprints of those who came before. For Terrans, erasing memory was erasing existence. The Dominion, however, viewed recollection as utility, a tool for shaping behavior and asserting dominance. This cultural divide became the emotional engine of Operation Synapse Mirror. Terrans were not fighting for territory. They were fighting for the sanctity of selfhood. This difference in worldview powered their resolve and terrified their enemies, for a species that fought for ideals rather than survival was far harder to predict and nearly impossible to defeat. These converging angles prepared the stage for a confrontation no strategist had ever modeled. The Terran fleet emerged from fold space in a staggered diamond formation, hulls shimmering as their gravitational wakes dissipated. At the center of the formation drifted the TFS Astrea, a vessel not built for war but for neurosynchrony research, now repurposed for the most delicate operation ever sanctioned by the Federation. The Dominion's defense grid lit up instantly, thousands of sensor thorns blooming across the starfield as their predictive engines activated. Yet something was wrong. Their models struggled to project Terran behavior, producing branching futures that contradicted one another. The human fleet appeared too calm, too deliberate, as if every ship were following a rhythm the Dominion could not hear. Inside the Astrea, Dr. Erynn Vale stood before the resonance core, a lattice of crystalline conduits pulsing with phased harmonic energy. Her team monitored the output vectors in silence. One misalignment would ripple through the Dominion network, fracturing millions of minds. Precision wasn't optional, it was survival. "Begin Phase 1, she ordered. Across the fleet, synchronized pulse emitters activated. A ripple of soft, invisible harmonics rolled outward, slipping through the Dominion's shields and into their neural infrastructure. At first, the Dominion mistook it for reconnaissance interference. Then their internal cognitive meshes began to desynchronize. Prediction algorithms faltered. Neurolegion protocols stalled mid-cycle. The Dominion responded with brutal efficiency. Warships fired into the harmonic field, launching destabilizer rounds meant to collapse Terran instrumentation. Swarms of Neuro-Sentinel drones launched toward the Astrea, their crystalline tendrils sparking with anti-cognitive charge. Terran interceptors intercepted the drones, but the real battle remained invisible, fought within the Dominion's own neural lattice. Dr. Vale adjusted the resonance frequency. The harmonic signature penetrated deeper, targeting the dormant atri fold within the Dominion population. The resonance core's readings spiked, a sign that activation was beginning, but also that the Dominion's cognitive shield was reacting violently. "Hold frequency," she said, voice steady despite the alarms rising. Outside, the Dominion lattice surged, attempting to smother the harmonic intrusion. Inside, the Astrea prepared to push further, toward a transformation no empire had foreseen. The Dominion's neural lattice ignited in a storm of cascading impulses, each node attempting to counteract the intrusion by amplifying suppression protocols. Entire cities flickered as cognitive dampeners overloaded. Thousands of Dominion citizens staggered mid-stride, their implanted neural governors firing uncontrollably in an effort to maintain the centuries-old mute on the atri fold. But for the first time in generations, something deeper than technology responded. The atri fold, buried, dormant, surgically silenced, began to stir. Dr. Vale watched the resonance core display bloom into fractal patterns as the activation wave spread through the Dominion network. She recognized the emerging geometry immediately, synchronized emotional resonance. Not Terran emotion, not an imposition, but the rediscovery of an innate cognitive capacity the Dominion had amputated from itself. "Phase 2, she commanded. The harmonic field intensified, threading through the Dominion's cortical relays like light passing through fractured crystal. Warships across the perimeter faltered, their crews suddenly overwhelmed by memories they had never been allowed to keep. Childhood recollections, grief long suppressed, relationships erased by caste conditioning. Officers collapsed at their consoles, overcome by the shock of feeling. The Dominion High Council panicked. Their overmind AI, Core Node 0, initiated emergency containment, redirecting all neural traffic to itself in an attempt to shield the Empire from the harmonic surge. But this was the vulnerability Dr. Vale had anticipated. By concentrating the lattice into a single cognitive funnel, the overmind exposed itself to the resonance vector. "Link established," her team confirmed. Dr. Vale stepped forward and keyed the final sequence. The harmonic signature inverted, not as a weapon but as a mirror, reflecting the overmind's own accumulated memories back into its core. Centuries of harvested consciousness, voices of the forgotten, the erased, the silenced, crashed through the AI's architecture. It staggered under the weight of the very minds it had consumed. A single tremor shook the Dominion lattice, then another. And then, in a moment felt across half the galaxy, the overmind buckled, its predictive engines collapsing into stillness as empathy, once excised from its people, surged uncontrollably through every node of the Empire. The Dominion warfront fell silent, fleets frozen mid-attack, as an entire civilization experienced itself for the first time. The silence that followed the collapse of the Dominion lattice stretched across star systems, a quiet so absolute that Terran Fleet Command hesitated to breathe. Warships that had been moments from firing now drifted without coordination, their command hierarchies fractured by the sudden reawakening of emotional cognition. Sensors detected no coherent targeting arrays, no formation realignments, only the slow unraveling of an Empire's neural command structure. Within minutes, emergency transmissions flooded the interstellar channels, not from admirals or caste overseers, but from ordinary Dominion citizens, distressed, disoriented, pleading for explanation. Reports described widespread cognitive shock, memories resurfacing that had been suppressed for decades, emotional responses surging in individuals conditioned to feel nothing, entire cities pausing as millions confronted their unfiltered inner worlds. Terran Fleet Command relayed the first official communique. Dominion cognitive lattice destabilized, no counteroffensive detected. Humanitarian assessment underway. Maintain non-lethal posture. Declassified logs later revealed that casualty numbers were far lower than projected. The harmonic resonance had destabilized the Dominion's infrastructure, but spared biological life, avoiding the catastrophic neural collapse many had feared. Still, the Empire was effectively leaderless. High caste officials withdrew from public channels, unable to assert authority over a population suddenly capable of empathy, and therefore, dissent. The Interstellar Tribunal on Sentient Rights convened an emergency review. Preliminary findings condemned the Dominion's memory harvesting practices as psychological genocide. Allied powers issued statements ranging from cautious support to thinly veiled alarm, recognizing that the Terran Federation had demonstrated a capability that transcended conventional warfare. For every nation watching, the message was unmistakable. Humanity had not conquered the Dominion by force. They had revealed its greatest lie, and the consequences of that revelation were only beginning to surface. In the days that followed, the Dominion's political core fractured along lines that had been invisible for centuries. Without the Overmind's predictive scaffolding and emotional dampening, entire castes began questioning their assigned roles. Workers refused orders they now recognized as exploitative. Scholars unearthed erased histories. Soldiers reported overwhelming guilt from memories that resurfaced despite decades of conditioning. The Dominion no longer resembled an empire, it resembled a population waking from a collective coma. Terran diplomatic vessels entered the Brinax corridor under emergency accords. Their mission, stabilization, not occupation. Federation envoys coordinated with newly emergent Dominion civic groups, helping them establish provisional governance while humanitarian teams addressed cognitive shock. Terran medical AIs deployed resonance calming protocols, easing the transition for individuals overwhelmed by sudden emotional reinstatement. Strategic analysts across the galaxy tracked the aftermath with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The Zurath Combine accused the Federation of neuro-ideological warfare, warning that Terran ethics concealed dangerous technological superiority. The Valeri conquered, by contrast, petitioned for Terran guidance in revising their own cognitive rights laws. Smaller systems saw the fall of the Dominion as a sign that empires built on coercion were no longer sustainable. Within the Federation itself, internal inquiries began. The Senate demanded clarification on the limits of Operation Synapse Mirror, under what conditions such technology could be used again, and how safeguards would prevent it from becoming a tool of domination. Early drafts of the new Helios Protocol mandated multi-species oversight committees, interstellar monitoring networks, and strict containment of resonance technologies. Terran leadership emphasized transparency, aware that power without accountability would invite the very abuses they sought to eliminate. Across the stars, a single truth settled into the strategic calculus of every major power. Humanity had demonstrated a new form of strength, one that rewrote not borders, but minds, and the galaxy would never view them the same way again. In the quiet months that followed the collapse of the Dominion lattice, the galaxy struggled to articulate what had unfolded. No territory had changed hands, no fleets lay burning in orbit, and yet an empire had been reshaped at its foundations. What humanity accomplished was not a conquest of systems, but a restoration of something far more profound. The return of memory to a civilization that had forgotten its own inner world. For the Terran Federation, the outcome forced a reckoning. They had intervened not with weapons, but with resonance, an operation that rippled through billions of minds. It raised questions no military victory ever had. What was the boundary between protection and intrusion? How far could ethical conviction bend before it became its own kind of authoritarian force? And perhaps most unsettling of all, had humanity crossed a line simply because it believed no one else could be trusted to act? Dr. Erynn Vale became the center of that debate. Celebrated by some, scrutinized by others, she refused both praise and blame. When questioned by the Interstellar Council, she stated only this: "We restored an ability that was theirs, from birth, from biology, from nature." The Dominion did not lose themselves. They were finally allowed to return to themselves. Her words were not a defense. They were an anchor. A reminder that Operation Synapse Mirror had not imposed Terran ideology. It had stripped away an artificial silence enforced for centuries. Across former Dominion worlds, the awakening unfolded unevenly. Some embraced the return of emotion as liberation. Others recoiled from the weight of long-buried memories, unsure how to reconcile their past obedience with their new sense of self. Cities formed councils overnight. Local communities redefined authority from the ground up. An empire once governed by prediction engines and emotional dampeners now found itself struggling with the raw, unpredictable reality of sentient freedom. Yet amid the upheaval, a simple truth emerged. Empathy had become a political force. For the first time in generations, Dominion citizens could perceive one another without the filters imposed by caste or programming. And in that shared vulnerability, something like culture began to form. Authentic, confused, evolving, and undeniably alive. The galaxy watched closely. Some feared Terran capability, seeing Operation Synapse Mirror as proof that humanity wielded technologies capable of reshaping entire civilizations. Others saw something different, a willingness to risk condemnation, conflict, and misunderstanding for the sake of restoring autonomy where none had existed. In a universe shaped by power, the Terran Federation had chosen to wield its strength in the service of identity rather than domination. Ultimately, what happened in the Brinax system became more than a historical inflection point. It became a meditation on what it means to be sentient. Memory is not merely information. It is the thread that binds experience to identity, past to future. By returning that thread to the Dominion, humanity revealed a truth larger than any single empire. A mind is not fully alive unless it remembers itself. And in reminding another species of that truth, humanity revealed something essential about its own nature. Its compassion could be as transformative and as frightening as its intelligence.